sorry. Oh, that's probably helpful. Okay. We don't care about that. We care about.
This one.
Do you want to present? You do the slides.
Oh, it's more I.
So this is the moment where I hit Norris over the head and where we start. Thank you all for being here. My name is Gabi Kaffka. This is Norris Krueger. And we work together on a project called EPIC. Actually, that's an abbreviation. It stands for Evaluation of Entrepreneurship Education Programs in Higher Education Institutions and Centers, which makes for EPIC in the wide sense of the word. Yes, there we go. So what are we going to do today? I will introduce the EPIC project as good as possible. Then Norris is going to talk about previous work, since he's an absolute expert in this field. Then we'll have an interactive part, so we can pick your brains. That's what we're here for. And then we have a plenary wrap-up to see what kind of things came up in the different groups. And since we have very little time, I try to speed through it so we can actually give you as much time as possible. The project is run by a consortium. My firm, my company is the lead firm, so I'm the project manager. But I'm just facilitator for excellent people in my team, which is the Danish Foundation for Entrepreneurship, represented by Cora Moberg, the Strossmayer University in Osijek, Croatia, represented by Slavica Singer, Strasek Center for Entrepreneurship, Klaus Seiler is with us in the team, and the Technopolis Group in England. And for us there is Zsuzsa Jaworka. She also works for the HE Innovate project that some of you might know. We have an expert panel of high-level experts. Norris is one of them. Margarita's going to join us at the workshop as well. And we have a larger advisory board or a think tank of first movers, in which we try to get everyone in who has to do with the subject, who's working on it, and who wants to contribute, and who has knowledge on it. But about that more later.
And Andy is also one of the experts.
And he's one of the experts, yes. And I'm thinking if there are more, because sometimes
and we have
I don't see
2 or 3 of the think tank people are here
present
as well, including our newest recruit,
Fiona over here. So it's very exciting that we're trying to get more people in. So what is the context of the project? As we know that there are many different types of students, and they require different types of entrepreneurship education programs, which also necessitates the development of different assessment tools and the use of those tools in order to measure the impact of entrepreneurship education programs on students. And therefore the European Commission has initiated a project for the evaluation of entrepreneurship education programs in higher education institutions and centers, which is meant to categorize existing entrepreneurship education programs as well as their results in terms of impacts and measures they are using to measure that impact. Because we wouldn't know about which impact there is if they didn't measure it. So it's very practically based. And the general objective is to encourage the development and to improve the quality and relevance of existing higher education, entrepreneurship education programs across Europe, and thereby contributing to the development of entrepreneurial competences, knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Yes. And so how are we going to do this? We will categorize existing programs, and this is something that has not really been done before, because although there have been case studies and a number of programs have been looked at, we will actually seek to really diversify the amount and type of programs we will look at and will categorize. And we will look at similarities, differences, strengths and weaknesses, key issues, obstacles and challenges in the learning and teaching approach, in the measures being used to measure impact, and the outcomes of that as they are. We do this via literature review, academic and non-academic literature, via a survey of students and educators. If all is well, in all of your delegates' bags, you found a survey flyer, which is of the project. And on this flyer is a link to a website where you find a little bit more information, but also the direct link to the survey. And I would love for all of you to fill in this survey as educators and to distribute the survey link to your students. And At the end of the survey, there is a field in which we ask you if you would like to participate in a pilot, and it would be great if there you'd write your email addresses and then we will approach you, because at the end of the day, we need to gather the opinions and viewpoints and knowledge of the educators in Europe. Otherwise, we will develop something which is useless. We collect information via a workshop with experts, where Norris will be, where Annie should have been and can't, so Kelly's coming luckily, and Margarita's going to be there, and some other people are going to be there, to talk about assessment methods, how can we assess outcomes in general, also related to entrepreneurship education programs, but also look a little bit wider, so that we might make use of things that are just recently coming up and are not used yet everywhere. So what is this all leading to? We are trying to develop a toolkit and a method for use to measure entrepreneurship education outcomes. And this toolkit is not only to provide you one instrument to save them all. It is meant to, actually there are 4 lines in this project. One is we want to give an overview of existing entrepreneurship programs and entrepreneurship education programs impact measures that are out there, that are being used, as well as a methodology of which impact measure method can be used for what type of program, for example, a certain type of audience, students, or a certain kind of teaching approach, or a certain kind of learning outcome that you're looking for. But also, if we see that across Europe there's a need for a new tool to be developed, and I'm very cautious about this because I don't want to jump the gun because we're just collecting information at this point, then we will see if we can shape or develop a tool that would fill a gap if we identify one. For example, we see kind of from the corner of our eyes that mindset development is hard to measure, so we're thinking about if we can maybe contribute with designing, shaping a tool. And then the 4th aspect is a self-assessment tool for students, because this toolkit, this online platform where this toolkit will be hosted, is not only for educators, but we want to encourage students to look at it as well and to maybe engage in self-assessment, which might be interesting for the educators as well. So that's why your input is very important, because eventually this toolkit has to be of use for you guys. And it's supposedly
Just a second.
for all 28 EU member states, but we have a global advisory panel because we want to get everybody's information in on what can be done, what makes sense, what's out there. And it should build on existing work, and this is exactly where Entrecomp comes into play. Probably a lot of you know Entrecomp or have heard of it. It's a conceptual model which provides a framework for 3 competence areas in which in total 15 dimensions can be measured. They've recently come with a progress in which they have sought to identify actual learning outcomes within those 15 dimensions, I'm sorry. And it's very exciting to see that various programs in Europe, entrepreneurship education programs, are having programs in which certain learning outcomes are being encouraged, stimulated, and achieved. So that is something that we will use as well as the basis for categorizing the programs that we look at, and in general to categorize information, because there's so much out there and we need a framework, and Entrecomp is for us something very useful. And I'm not just saying that because Margarita is there who actually made it.
But we added an extra 2 minutes for her.
So, and this is where I will give the word to Norris.
Well, I was lucky to be involved in a systematic literature review on looking at what had been published in the last several years in good journals and great conferences on the impact of unproofed education on higher ed. And we looked at over 200 studies. And can you guess how many of them didn't suck? And that they had poor theory, they had pedestrian at best research design, not the greatest analysis, and they all got published. Now the good news is they all talked most of them talked about intention, so I got a whole bunch of new citations, so my G-Scholar thing looks better. But what's interesting is that this lack of theory is kind of an issue. But that also means it's a great opportunity that if we're going to look at assessment, what's really going on, and one of the things that Andy and I talk a lot about is, why aren't we looking to the educators? How are real educators evaluating this? We want to, if we are moving the needle, what does that mean? How do we measure? How do we know that we're doing that? So there's some really interesting stuff that's going on. We know that from the education literature that they usually categorize knowledge, skills, call it mindset, behaviors, and external impacts. There are sort of 5 areas that we look at. Is, do they know more than they did before? How do we assess that? Have they improved their skills, which is a really a big lever in the broader human resources literature. Behaviors, what are the students doing? Are they, for instance, engaging with the external community? Or are they actually starting businesses is one small facet of that. By the way, simply counting how many of your students start businesses is not necessarily a great metric. In fact, it can be highly misleading. And there is a lot of data science here that we want to make painless for the users, but that's important. But you have external stakeholders who would like to know what your economic impact is. Whether it's that makes sense or not to you, it is going to make sense to your stakeholders. The big thing that we want to stress with this process is that external stakeholders are going to have very different ideas as to what your success is, what your performance are. That it is important for us to be rigorous. It's important for us to use great theory. How many people know the movie The Martian? What's the best line from that movie? And it explains what we're doing. We're going to science the shit out of this. That we've got a great team of people. We have a great core team. We've reached out across. We've got more than 40 people on this global advisory board who are a mix of thinkers and doers and people who coming everywhere from startup Chile to China to. And yeah, this will probably be a good marketing channel down the road for our stuff, but this is really exciting that we're already starting to see some very interesting things. And if we can get the next iteration on good metrics, have a robust, validated toolkit that looks at behaviors, at skills, at knowledge, at mindset, which is my bias, and external impacts. I've worked too long in economic development to care about that one. I think we're going to have some really exciting stuff, but we need you. We need your help. We need your inputs on this. This is definitely an opportunity to crowdsource among expert opinions. And I'm going to turn it back to Gabi.
Wow, you made up for the time that I talked too long.
Yeah, well, that way I wanted to be more nervous than you.
Very nice.
Thank you, Gabi.
So we can go to the next slide.
Yes, dear.
Because now we're going to put
Ma'am.
you to work. We have a question, a general, broader question for you, but we're going to cut it down to parts, which is what makes an assessment tool useful in your educational work? Now, that was, I thought, oh, if we only have 4 people in the room, then this is what we're going to do. Norris was like, yeah, I doubt it. And I was like, well, you never know. And he said, well, let's just see. So we split up into the next slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Namely, I would like you to discuss at every table 3 questions. Namely, what are current methods for evaluation and assessment that you are using and that you would like to use and or would like to use? What do you like or not like about those that you are using, and why are you using them? Is there a reason? Are there certain stakeholders that are interested in certain kind of impacts? Are you obliged to show certain kind of impacts? Is it useful for you to show certain kind of impacts, and to whom? And what are you looking for in an entrepreneurship education program evaluation? Is it that certain kind of learning approaches need certain kind of measures, so you're looking for those measures, or you have them?
Something to think about is that it's not just outputs that we're assessing. It can be inputs, even the processes, the throughputs. Should we be assessing a teacher experience? There are a lot of people in North America who think that if you were an entrepreneur, you get points for your instructors who've actually done that. That certainly has its flaws. I argue that if people actually had education training, actually were trained as an educator, that would probably help.
Yeah.
That's not big in North America.
Yeah.
However, in North
true.
America, the answer to this is my program gets an A.
By the students or by
by us, that they want to be able to say, we are the best entrepreneurship program in the United States, all 2,000.
So there's very different ways. Some of them use student assessments for just evaluating the course, so I like this program or not. Others actually ask students, so what did you learn? Those methods are possible as well. So we would like you to go ahead, discuss these questions. I have actually put down some pointers for these things on here, but
We'll be walking around.
So yeah, we'll have to find a way to put them up.
One final thing is, in terms of evaluation, is it's, joking about everybody getting an A, sort of joking, that how do you make these programs developmental, not punitive? I was at an Entrepreneurship Educators Conference in April, and I asked everyone, how many of you are a great entrepreneurship educator? And the only people who didn't raise their hands were the ones who actually were experts. Think about it. I mean, it was a little, well, it was funny, but it also...
There was a question.
Question, ma'am.
Yes, yeah, in terms of what you're asking us to discuss is the assessment of the program, not how we assess the students on the program.
Right. We want to, it's just a program assessment as, that we want to be broad about this. But what methods do you have? What would you like to have? At the end of the day, what is the kind of assessment you really would want that would rock for you, would rock for the students, rock for your external stakeholders? That would be brilliant, because it's a messy field, but you're the customer.
What makes it useful for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really the overarching. And within that, I think everybody's very different. So please feel free to go broad. Thank you. So
You're
please
the
go
experts.
ahead. Yes.
Go get them.
And we will try to hang these up to give you a little bit more of a... So that's where the rigor is. The rigor is theoretical. This is what you imagine your program is going to be. And what you learn from researching for theories about whether that will or won't work. So I've been using it to evaluate enterprise education.
Couple more minutes, everyone.
From the Entrepreneurship
Don't make me sing again.
So we have to, because we only have 10 minutes left, I would like to wrap up and see from each group. I would like to hear what they've discussed, what they found, and maybe what they can give us for pointers for our project. And I would like to start with this group still right here.
Oh yeah.
All right. Can I ask you to say what you've done?
Yeah, we had a whole conversation about what the purpose of evaluation is and where measurement sat in there, and we were having a conversation at a philosophical level as well. Do we want to measure, and why would we be measuring, and to whom would we be measuring for? We were sharing different ways that we have measured everything from student self-assessment to teacher practices, to actions of head teachers, to a number of student experiences. And I was sharing about rigorous evaluation, which is something that I've moved towards as a result of dissatisfaction with the whole gold standard randomised controlled trial systematic review thing, because it might give you a score of what worked for some people at a certain time, but it won't necessarily help you surface the programme theory, because entrepreneurship education programmes, it reminded me of 2013 at IEEC, where Alan Gibb at Sheffield was talking about entrepreneurship education programmes is like being in the supermarket in the shampoo aisle and talking about shampoo when this one is going to make your hair shiny, this one is going to make it softer. So they all do completely different things. So realist evaluation is about surfacing programme theory for a particular intervention and then looking at how well that happened And it's got a whole methodology, so it's like waxing the...
Brilliant, thank
But
you.
it's really good for the why are you evaluating, really think it through. Why are you doing the assessment, for whom and what group are
You're
you
just
assessing?
making our job harder, but.
That's how it works. But Kelly's practical one.
Well, we were then talking about perhaps what we really need is a methodology and a framework and a set of, you need to consider this, that and the other. So rather than saying, coming up with an impact measure, it's coming up with an impact process.
Yeah.
Oh.
All the things that one needs to consider
Yeah.
when
Yeah,
designing.
yeah. And again, thinking about quality assurance is assessing how well you delivered what you set out to do. And perhaps so it's the process of the assurance and the impact assessment and the measurement, perhaps that is more powerful at this stage.
Define before where you want to go.
Yeah, but then having context, because we all have very, very different contexts and very different purposes of the programmes and the interventions we're involved with, and they're not comparable necessarily.
Yeah.
So kind of, but that's so it's
We don't
more.
want discussion. No, we cannot get into discussion.
But keynotes of how you draw the context out would be useful, so you can then pull together evaluations you can compare.
I agree.
Oh, that's fine.
Good job on seeing you in Brussels.
Yes, ma'am. And don't look into that light.
Can I ask someone to...
We had a bit of discussion about context too. We were kind of all about where the students are coming from and the fact that we have very mixed students and different backgrounds, and how that then impacts on what kind of outcomes they want and what you might actually expect, and how that complicates things. So there's lots about who's a recipient and how are people selected onto the course, because even if as a program design, you design your program, you expect people, you have institutional mechanisms, which mean you're not necessarily able to select the people that you think would be the most appropriate for that course. And then we had a discussion also about some of who's evaluated when you're doing an intervention, so say if you've got funding, you have someone who's then evaluating it, and that has an impact on what kind of evaluations you're using. So we're talking here about, in FB context, getting European funding and then the business startups requirements, but that's not really appropriate in that context. And then how do we end up quite shifting our evaluation because of what the funders are requiring, or who's evaluating us is what they're wanting, or the institutional level, things like the NSS or the TEF, are what they really care about, which isn't necessarily about what our students have learned.
Well, can I have two things to those? Well, one is about where we're looking for tangible outcomes, such as behavioural changes, students being able to do this which they couldn't do before, like setting up a pop-up shop, for example.
Thank you.
Similarly to the first two groups that spoke, where a lot of discussion around context, we're all coming from very different situations. We're looking at assessment of courses, of degree programs, assessment of collaborative international programs which have external funders, what kind of measures they're looking for. Myself, I'm looking at from assessment of extracurricular programs, and then programs that are embedded within curricula, so many different things to consider, and then so many different assessment methods associated with all of those things as well. Some of the things we discussed included the national level assessments, like the NSS and the Estonian equivalent, right down to informal conversations with students, and that kind of qualitative feedback, and the challenge that we can have around converting that into some kind of a metric as well. Student self-evaluation is something that we all use as well, and then the assessment of programs' impact through outcomes, be that employment levels, self-employment, the KPI that a lot of us are familiar with around numbers of graduate businesses registered, those kind of things. But when it came to the dream section, which was a bit quite rushed at the end, I mean, the longer term impact was something that came out from everybody.
And then you mean long-term impact in the sense of?
Well, we hadn't gotten to that bit, but
Is it Harvard looked at business school, found out a lot of their graduates were not starting businesses until 10 years out. There was a blip, and other schools have found this that have you laid the enabling conditions for people when the right opportunity comes along. But that's hard to. It doesn't fit under a 10-year cycle or most funding cycles.
yeah.
We had a review here in the UK as well where we discovered it was the average of that particular review was 5 or 6 years, as I recall.
And attribution is hard, isn't it?
that long.
Yeah.
How are you going to connect it back to that particular intervention?
If there's no more economic crisis all of a sudden,
Yeah.
everybody's happier.
That's it, and again, we haven't discussed what that impact as a group, please jump in here, but for me it's around the longer term employment outcome that just relates to the programs that I run, and all that can be linked to desirable graduate attributes that the university has set out as well. I think graduate outcomes assessment measurement and how that's changed will have a big impact for me personally. About the longer term impact, this is something that you mentioned.
Yeah,
What
but
cool ideas of tracking that?
my ideas are totally on a different level, meaning like assessment is shifting from students giving feedback to the teachers from actually assessing students' progress over time in real time and seeing like, what are the not only maybe the entrepreneurship program but other programs decided how they also support or not supporting that, which means sort of like having a huge data pool or some sort of microdata that you can really quickly turn into the information that you can use actually intervene or within the course, changing on time, like on the feed, something like that.
Yeah.
That's my dream.
Yeah, well, good to hear.
Yeah, in terms of a tool that's something potentially interesting around converting assessment to skills development. It's a thing that we do where our work is across all programs. We have the standard session for skills that we ask students to self-evaluate against, and that's across everything. Someone who's attended a 2-hour session to someone who's taken part in like a 3-month internship program to a 12-month entrepreneurship program. It's really interesting to track in the long term how their ranking self-evaluation, those skills converts in terms of impact on like self-employment.
We have to go on, but one quick last remark.
Yeah. So basically, yes, as I see, maybe I would like to add that I think this future assessment should be done on 4 different levels: on individual, team, enterprise, and society. And on individual and team level, it's necessary to measure the success, and on enterprise and society level, the impact. So how all these interact, and of course the challenge is how to create a systematic way of measuring that and to composing right KPIs.
Validity and reliability. Oh, no, we have to go on to this table.
So a lot of this has already come up, so I feel like I'm going to repeat a lot of it. Just the different contexts, curricular, extracurricular, the range of the different kind of assessment points, whether it's kind of short, one day, one off bits, how do you assess that versus boot camps, or even embedded courses or courses that go on for 4 years in that kind of structure. They all need different types of assessment, different measuring data points. We talked often about the fact that how many startups are created and the type of startups, and that looks like that as a data, but it's often asked of us by stakeholders because that's very influential. What's interesting is how do you track those startups and how they perform over longer periods, and trying to engage. That's fine when you've got small numbers of startups that you can kind of have that relationship with and you can nurture, and they're more likely to give you that data, and especially when it's around confidential information like turnover amounts. but actually, how does that scale? You know, how can you keep that engagement when you're potentially creating multiple startups over numerous years? How do you track that data over a significant period? And how do you buy in those people to give you that information and buy into the importance of that data and how to use that data? So whether a toolkit could help us in that kind of support infrastructure. We talked about pre and post and during assessments for the students. We talked about reflective elements. We talked about the quantitative versus qualitative issues, and the fact that quite often the qualitative takes a lot of time and resources to actually be able to manage. And you almost need access to social scientists to look at that data and analyse it to actually work out what the patterns are and has something come out of it.
Do you want to?
Thank you.
Hi. So we didn't really think about dreaming that much. We just kind of tried to brain dump everything we could think of what might be happening or what might be possible. So. So we got different stakeholder types I'll mention briefly. So students is a huge one. We talked about simple things we could do is measure number of beneficiaries, number of applicants to programs, and number of credits, because those are useful to the university. How much money you're bringing in, how popular is your course, how many benefited. That's a simple metric though. We talked about more qualitative stuff like student case studies that might be a way of saying this is a person's journey through the ecosystem, and this is how they've benefited. Later on, that's obviously very small scale. We talked about more scientific measures, so we might use things like Asjan's theory of motivation for motivation measure, and then there's also self-efficacy measures, which is kind of stuff that's done on entrepreneurship education research a lot. That could be entry. We talk about entry and exit interviews. Difference between a 3-year course and a 1-week intervention is obviously quite big. And we talked about who the control is. So how do you find those who've had the treatment to those who haven't? So we talked about some cases where that's possible in the same institution without doing something unethical, which might happen otherwise, where you say, we're going to tell you can have it, you can't, which is not ethical. And then we also talked about some more in-depth interviews with students might be about their self-development or their perception of their own self-development, how does it help my career? It could also be, of course, the grade performance. So a student might reflect on this basis, saying, has it helped my degree? If I help, that's another outcome for that. It might be important for the university. We also talked about employment quality. So what is the? It might be looking at startup numbers. Onto that, it could be we look at what's the quality of career they've gone into. So has that helped? That brings on to the other stakeholders who said, let's look at this as businesses and startups, a number of businesses to measure. We might also look at something that Spartans at Leeds, which is alumni donations or reinvestment. So we are a graduate of the program, we're putting money back in. That's impact.
Richard.
Yeah. Oh, quickly. I'm shutting up. Okay, I'll move even faster. Are we using?
Oh,
that's it. Okay.
Oh, let him go.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Richard.
So I'll summarise
Finish.
5 seconds. So impact on educators, impact on alumni, and also impact on developing entrepreneurial university outcomes. So are the programs actually changing the university as well?
That is a good point. Glad you said that.
Sorry.
And universities. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not going to show you the last slides. Can we go to the very last slide?
The very last
because
slide.
it's too late. But I thank you. If you leave me your card or your email address, I will collect everything that's been said here, and I will put it together and I will send it out to you.
Is this
so you're all informed? Yes. This is our website. There's information. There's my email address, my phone number on there, so you can find me. It's also on this flyer, which should be in your bag. If not, please come to me and I give you one. I will keep you informed if you let me. And I thank all of you for your input. It's going to be a multifaceted toolkit. I think that's obvious. And we're going to take all of this into consideration. That's why we were here, to hear what you guys need. Thank you so much.
And as an entrepreneur and a data scientist, this is incredibly helpful.
I've just got one wee point, maybe worth adding. I was at a very interesting thing recently, actually about QAA measuring the impact of creative education. And one thought we had was actually when you're looking at if you're trying to measure success, a lot of it is around graduate destinations, whether that's job or employability or etc.
but actually do these people feel, especially when it's creative students, do they feel successful?
Yeah.
Because actually, what maybe we should be looking at saying to people, do you feel happy? Do you feel successful?
and
then
Objective
working
versus subjective
backwards.
measures.
Emotional experiences are really important, not to sound like Martin Lacasse, but that's something that's a powerful marker of significant
Yeah.
cognitive change.
I think it's something that gets overlooked.
Yeah, great. We've
Thank
got
you so
to
much.
finish. Norris, Gabi, thank you very much.
And Andy and everybody else, this this was brilliant. This was even better than I expected.